Welcome. This channel shares stories inspired by real events, narratives told with respect, memory, and humanity. Because the past has a voice, and we are here to listen.
During the First World War, hundreds of French children wrote letters to their parents. Letters full of love, of longing, of hope. The problem is that many of those parents were already dead, and yet the letters kept coming. Someone had to decide what to do with them. I was that person. Come closer, dear listeners. Sit here with me. Let me show you something I kept hidden for decades. Something that changed my life forever. This box stayed hidden in my closet for 40 years. Inside it, 327 letters, written by children during the First World War. Letters that were never delivered, because the recipients no longer existed. I kept them, in secret, for decades, against postal regulations, against the law. Why? Because throwing them away meant erasing the last words of children who had lost everything. And I couldn't do that. This one here has a drawing of a dog. Papa, Rex misses you. So do I. The father never read it. He never could. But I read it, and I kept it. For him, for the child, for all of them. My name is Celeste Laurent. I worked at the post office during the Great War. My story didn't begin with these letters, but these letters changed everything. Let me tell you how we got here. How a young woman who loved organizing mail became the guardian of voices the world tried to forget. It was the summer of 1914, and I was still very young. I had just left my teenage years behind. We lived in Bellevaux, a small town in the French countryside where every inhabitant knew not just names, but each other's stories. Our house was on Rue des Tilleuls, a narrow street paved with uneven stones, lined with centuries-old linden trees that in the summer months formed a fragrant canopy of deep green and yellowish flowers. The scent of those flowers in the warm July air is one of the most vivid memories I carry. The smell of innocence, of the time when we still believed the world made sense. My father, Auguste Laurent, was the manager of the municipal post office. A meticulous and dedicated man with an impeccably trimmed mustache and round glasses that invariably slipped down the bridge of his nose when he concentrated on his records. Mama, Margot, took care of our home and the garden where she grew roses that were the envy of all the neighbors. I helped Papa at the post office 3 times a week. What pride I felt walking by his side through the stone streets of Bellevaux. We would greet Madame Rousseau, perpetually, busy with her bakery that filled the street with the aroma of fresh bread. We would wave to Monsieur Dubois, the young baker who had recently married Marie, and had a little daughter with enormous blue eyes. We would exchange pleasantries with the Moreau family, who tended the flock that grazed in the field near the church. The post office occupied a limestone building in the central square, with tall windows and a polished mahogany counter where the world's news converged. I delighted in the atmosphere of that place, the scent of quality paper, iron gall ink, imported stamp glue, and that peculiar fragrance of envelopes arriving from distant metropolises. In those blessed days, the mail brought mainly joys. Wedding announcements, births eagerly awaited, planned family visits, small businesses thriving. People wrote about abundant harvests, about children learning to read, about the tiny happinesses that make up a life at peace. It was simple work. Organizing correspondence, applying stamps, recording deliveries. But it filled me with purpose. I felt like a fundamental part of that constant flow of human stories passing through our hands. Then came that July morning. The day was particularly hot, perfumed by the roses Mama had planted beneath the post office window. I was organizing the mail when I heard Papa make a sound I will never forget. Something between a sigh and a muffled groan. "Celeste!" he called me, and I detected an unprecedented tremor in his usually steady voice. "Come see this, my daughter." The telegram lay on the mahogany counter. Official, cold words that would alter the course of millions of lives. Archduke Franz Ferdinand assassinated in Sarajevo. Diplomatic tensions escalating. Military mobilization possible. Papa removed his glasses and cleaned them nervously. "Don't worry, dear," he said, but his hands betrayed his reassuring words. "These are just distant complications, far too distant to affect us." How wrong we were. In the following days, a succession of telegrams arrived with increasing frequency. The words became ever more frightening. Mobilization, declaration of war, military alliances. I didn't fully understand, but I felt fear growing like a dense shadow over our little Bellevaux. People began to gather in front of the post office. They wanted news. They wanted to understand the incomprehensible. Monsieur Dubois, the blacksmith, insisted it was merely a quarrel between kings that would soon be resolved. Madame Rousseau kept repeating that we were too small, too insignificant for any war to reach us. But then came the posters. General mobilization. All able-bodied men must report immediately. And our life collapsed like a house of cards in the wind. On a morning I will never forget, I witnessed Jean-Claude Dubois, the young baker who had barely begun his married life, kiss his wife Marie and his little daughter, Marguerite. He carried a bundle on his back and tried to hide his tears. Little Marguerite kept asking, "Papa, why are you traveling without us?" That same week, Henri Moreau said goodbye to his daughter Isabelle. Marcel Fontaine embraced his 3 small children for the last time. Thomas Gautier promised his widowed mother he would return before the first winter. Our little Bellevaux, which had always echoed with children's laughter and animated conversations on street corners, transformed into something strangely silent, as if someone had extracted half the music of life. And Papa, my dear Papa, also received his summons. Initially, being an essential postal service employee, he obtained a temporary deferment. "Someone needs to maintain communications," the officer declared. "Families need to receive news." But 3 months later, even essential employees were requisitioned. Papa would be transferred to the military post office in Reims, a larger city near the front lines. I would remain alone, responsible for Bellevaux's post office, a young woman barely out of her teens charged with connecting our town to a world at war. That's when they began to appear. First was little Marguerite. She arrived on a freezing October afternoon, her cheeks pink from the biting wind, carrying a paper folded with extreme care. "Mademoiselle Celeste," she said with that crystalline voice of childhood, "may I send a letter to my papa? Mama said you know where he is." My heart contracted painfully. I knew Jean-Claude Dubois was somewhere in the trenches of Verdun, if he was still alive. But how could I explain this to such a small child? "Of course, dear," I replied, extending my hands to receive the letter. Then came Isabelle Moreau, bringing a colorful drawing for her Papa Henri. Next came the Fontaine brothers, the eldest trying to be brave while caring for his younger siblings. One after another, the children of Bellevaux came to the post office with their little letters. Correspondence filled with pure love, deep longing, and unwavering hope. Letters about lost teeth, baby's first steps, flowers that bloomed in the family garden, small childhood secrets that only a father or mother could truly understand. And then I made a devastating discovery. It was a cold November night, and I was meticulously organizing the mail when I realized there were no real addresses on the children's letters. None of them had specific knowledge of their parents' locations. They simply knew they had gone to the war, a vague, distant destination that existed only in their childish imaginations. The children came to me with absolute faith that I would know exactly how to make their words reach their recipients, and I didn't have the courage to shatter that pure trust. It was that night I read the first letter, Marguerite's, with her uncertain handwriting but filled with genuine love. And there, alone in the silent post office of our little Bellevaux, with the winter wind whispering through the old window panes, I understood that I had become something unimaginable, the guardian of words that might never find their true recipients, the guardian of the broken hearts of children who still believed love could cross any distance. December 1914. The war they promised would end before Christmas was only beginning. You know, when I look back now, I realize none of us understood what was coming. We thought in terms of months. The war lasted 4 years and 3 months, 1,568 days of suffering. It was that winter when the first official correspondences began to arrive. Envelopes with military stamps that I recognized from a distance. The first was for Marie Dubois. We regret to inform you that Private Jean-Claude Dubois has fallen in combat. It fell to me to deliver it. When I knocked on her door, she already knew. She collapsed while little Marguerite tugged at her skirt. "Why is Mama crying?" Then came Henri Moreau, Marcel Fontaine, Thomas Gautier. Verdun was becoming a name. Everyone feared. The news arriving by telegraph spoke of battles lasting weeks, of trenches transforming into mass graves. But the children didn't understand permanence. Marguerite kept coming. "Mama said Papa became a star, but I think he's playing hide and seek. Can you send my letter?" In February 1915, I received an urgent telegram from Papa. He was at the military post office in Reims. "Urgently need help. Critical situation. Come immediately." I departed on a freezing morning. The train was full of wounded, young faces with old men's eyes, mutilated bodies, shattered souls. I brought with me a small suitcase where I had tucked some children's letters. I couldn't abandon them. Reims was devastation. A city wounded by bombardments, destroyed buildings, craters in the streets. The military post office operated in a requisitioned building, always crowded. Papa had aged terribly, gray hair, trembling hands. "Celeste, we can no longer manage. There's so much correspondence." And it was in Reims that I came to know the true extent of the horror. Families weren't just losing fathers. They were disintegrating completely. Mothers died of heartbreak. Grandparents couldn't endure. Homes were abandoned. And the children were taken to orphanages. It was but one afternoon when I heard children's voices. A nun, Sister Agnès of the Sisters of Saint Vincent de Paul, accompanied 3 visibly malnourished children. "These children would like to send letters," she said gently. A small girl approached. "Do you know how to send letters to heaven?" "That's where my parents are." Sister Agnes made a discreet gesture, a request to respect the illusion. "What is your name?" I asked, kneeling down. "Amélie. Amélie Bonnard. Can you help me write? I don't know all the letters yet." I sat with the children, providing paper and ink. Amélie dictated to me. "Dear Mama and Papa, it's me, Amélie. I'm in a big house with other children. Sister Agnes is kind, but she doesn't sing like Mama. I take care of my doll Celestine like you taught me, Mama. I give her baths, brush her hair. Papa, remember the bicycle? I've grown. My shoes are tight. When you come back, can we buy new ones? There's a boy who cries every night. I told him our parents are traveling. You will come back, won't you? You promised to take care of me. The food doesn't taste like yours, Mama. I miss the smell of home. Papa, can you come get me soon? I promise to be good. I love you to the stars, Amelie. When I finished writing, my hands were trembling. Amelie watched me with enormous eyes. Of course, dear. I'll make sure they receive it. But how could I reveal that her parents had been killed in a bombardment? The older boy looked at me. Can you visit us at the orphanage? There are other children who want to write. It would be a blessing, said Sister Agnes. We shelter many children. Many need someone who will listen. I promised to visit them on Sunday. Nothing prepared me. The Sainte Marie orphanage was immense and austere. The war had transformed it into an overcrowded ark. Sister Agnes led me through the corridors. I needed to lean against the wall. The smell was suffocating. Cheap soap, rancid food, dampness, children without regular baths, without clean clothes. Forgive the conditions, she murmured. We do what we can with scarce resources. In the dormitories, I saw beds crammed together, miserable mattresses, malnourished children, girls scratching, lice, boys in oversized clothes. But the heavy silence impacted me most. It wasn't shyness, it was resignation, as if existing in silence was safer. You know, years later I discovered that Sainte Marie orphanage was not an exception. Throughout France, institutions that housed 20 children received 60, 80, 100. Resources came from private charity, the Red Cross, donations. It was never enough. Children, the sister announced in the refectory. This is Mademoiselle Celeste. She came to help those who want to write letters. Their eyes lit up. For the first time in weeks, I saw hope. Can you really help us write to our parents? Asked a girl. Certainly. And the stories began to flow. The sister explained. The little ones will need you to transcribe. The older ones can write themselves, but need help. The teenagers have much to say, but don't know how. That afternoon, surrounded by dozens of children, I understood my true purpose. It wasn't just organizing military. Correspondence. It was giving voice to these survivors. It was helping them maintain connection with loved ones, even if it existed only on paper. Every afternoon after that, after work, I walked to the orphanage. I carried paper, ink, stamps, paid for by me. I became the scribe of their hopes, the guardian of their words. Spring 1916. The war was completing its second year. It's hard to explain what happens to hope when time drags on endlessly. In the first year, the children still believed it. Would be a matter of weeks. In the second year, they began to understand that perhaps it was forever. It was that spring when I met Julien Fontaine. He wasn't so small anymore, but still a child, with eyes that had witnessed too much for his age. His father, Marcel, had been deported to a forced labor camp in the occupied regions. His mother, Claire, had disappeared during an evacuation. Julien had arrived at the orphanage carrying two younger siblings, Antoine and little Lucy. He protected them, with a dedication that broke the heart, always checking if they had eaten, if they were warm, if they weren't crying at night. Sister Agnes confided in me. Julien rarely smiles. He's taken on responsibilities that even adults couldn't bear. In those days, war news arrived constantly by telegraph. The Battle of Verdun dragged on month after month. 10 months of combat that transformed the city into ruins and the surrounding fields into a cemetery. At the military post office, we processed thousands of letters daily. Letters from soldiers to families, letters from families to soldiers, and increasingly, those official correspondences everyone dreaded. We regret to inform you. One April afternoon, Julian came to me with a letter he had written himself. Dear Papa and Mama, I'm writing with my own hands. Sister Agnès taught me difficult words. I practice for when you return. I want you to know I take care of Antoine and Lucy like you asked. Antoine has grown a lot. I mark his height on the wall like Papa used to. Lucy sucks her thumb when she's scared, but I hold her hand until she falls asleep. Papa, I know where you are must be hard. I heard about the camps and heavy labor. I wonder if you have food, a warm place. I wish I could send you a blanket or soup. Mama, I don't know where you are. I hope you're safe. When the war ends, how will we find each other? I think about this every night. Maybe we can go back home, if it still exists. Sometimes I fear you won't recognize us. Antoine lost teeth. Lucy speaks in full sentences. I've grown so much my pants are short. But our love hasn't changed. Papa, I try to be brave. But sometimes when no one sees, I cry. Not just from sadness, but from tiredness. It's hard to always be the big brother. Hard to pretend I know the answers when Antoine asks about your return. I know I shouldn't complain. You face worse things. But I wanted you to know that sometimes I feel too small for so much. Responsibility. Sister Agnès says God takes care of us. I pray every night, but sometimes I feel angry at God for allowing this. Is that a sin? I hope you understand it's because I love too much. I promise to keep taking care of my siblings. I promise to be strong, but promise to return soon. We need you. With love, Julian. When I finished reading, he watched me with eyes too serious. Is it a good letter? He asked quietly. It's extraordinary. Your parents will be proud. He nodded, but his hands trembled as he folded the letter. Mademoiselle Celeste, do you think they'll really come back? I didn't know how to answer. Reports spoke of camps where people disappeared, of evacuations where families were scattered. You see, when I look back, I realize that was the moment when the war stopped being a temporary event and became permanent reality. The children began to understand that perhaps this was forever. And it was that year when the number of orphanages exploded. It wasn't just Sainte Marie. In Reims, 3 new ones opened. In Paris, 10. In Lyon, 5. The Red Cross established temporary shelters. The Sisters of Saint Vincent de Paul took over entire buildings. But resources were never enough. Food was scarce. Clothes, patched until they could be patched no more. Medicine, practically non-existent. And the children kept arriving. It was that summer when I met Sophie, a girl who arrived different from the others. She had lived in hiding for an entire year when Germans occupied her village. Her family hid her in an attic. She stayed there, alone, for months. Her mother would come up at night with food. Her father never returned from mobilization. Then came a bombardment. The house was hit. Her mother didn't survive. Neighbors found Sophie 3 days later, still hidden in the destroyed attic. When she arrived at the orphanage, she didn't speak. She just watched. But one day, weeks later, she came to me with a piece of paper. She had drawn a house. And underneath, in trembling handwriting, Mama, I'm still waiting for you to come up with food. I kept that drawing. I kept it because someone needed to witness that Sophie existed, that she waited, that she still loved even after everything. And it was in that moment I understood. It wasn't just about the letters arriving or not. It was about preserving these voices. It was about ensuring the world would never forget that these children existed and loved. Autumn 1917. The war was completing its third year. 3 years. Can you imagine? For a child, 3 years is an eternity. Amélie, who had arrived at the orphanage so small, now could no longer clearly remember her mother's face. Julian, who was still a boy, was beginning to become a young man. Forced maturation, stolen, and the teenagers. The teenagers had lost something they would never recover. The innocence of believing the world made sense. It was that autumn when I met Léonie Martel, already a teenager when she arrived. Alone, on a rainy afternoon. Her parents had been deported to forced labor in Germany. She had remained hidden for months in neighbors' houses. When the situation became impossible, she came to the orphanage. Léonie was different. She didn't run, didn't play, didn't cry. She stayed by the windows, gazing at the horizon with an empty expression. Sister Agnès confided in me. Léonie has taken on the hardest tasks. She washes clothes, helps in the kitchen, organizes dormitories. She works with adult sufficiency, but never smiles. In those days, the war news was increasingly grim. Russia had withdrawn from the conflict after the revolution. America had entered, bringing hope of reinforcements. But the war continued bleeding Europe. At the military post office, the volume of correspondence was overwhelming. We worked from dawn to night. Papa had aged terribly. Completely white hair now, hands that trembled constantly. Celeste, he told me one night. Sometimes I wonder if we'll survive this. Not physically, but emotionally. If we'll still be human when it ends. After 3 months, Léonie came to me. Dear parents, I don't know if you'll receive this, but I need to write. Not from hope that you'll read it, but because I need to put these words somewhere before they consume me. I'm already a teenager, and I feel like I've lived a century. Do you remember how I was? The girl who dreamed of being a teacher, who read under the pear tree, who believed the world made sense. That girl no longer exists. She ended when soldiers knocked on our door. When I saw you being taken away, I know you'd want me to keep hope. I know you'd tell me to be strong, take care of myself, not lose faith. And I've tried, but I don't know what to believe in anymore. I watch small children still waiting. I see boys carrying adult responsibilities, and I recognize in their eyes the certainty that nothing will ever be the same. It's not that I have lost love for you. It's not that I don't wish for your return. It's that I can no longer pretend to believe. And this honesty makes me feel guilty. Do you know what's most cruel? It's that I've grown up, but alone. All the conversations we should have had, all the advice you would have given me, everything was stolen. I've become a person you don't know. And if you return, can we still be a family? Sometimes I feel rage at you for leaving me. I know you had no choice, but the rage exists. I'm angry that you taught me the world made sense, that families stayed together, that love conquered all. Then the rage passes, and emptiness remains, and exhaustion. I'm so tired of being strong, of caring for the younger ones, of pretending I know what to do. I'm exhausted from being an adult while still being so young. Don't write saying it will be okay. Don't make promises you might not keep. Just know that I love you. I will always love you. And that the girl you raised still exists, somewhere inside, even buried under all this. Wait. If I don't survive, I want you to know I tried to be brave. If I survive, I promised to try to remember how to smile. With love that hurts, Leonie. P.S. I kept the last photograph of our family. It's deteriorated, but our faces remain. I look at it every night, trying to remember what it was like to be happy. When I finished, I had to leave. I walked through the streets in the light rain, letting it wash away my tears. Because that letter was simultaneously the most honest and most terrible thing I had heard. It was the voice of a generation forced to grow up too soon. You see, my dears, that was the year I realized the war didn't just destroy bodies. It destroyed childhoods. It stole dreams. It transformed children into adults before their time. And it was also the year when I began to understand my true role. It wasn't just preserving innocent hopes. It was also honoring honest disillusionment. It was witnessing both faith and doubt, both love and rage. Because all these emotions were valid, all deserved to be remembered. And it was that winter when I met Francois Dubois. He wasn't a soldier. A heart condition had prevented him from being mobilized. But he had found another way to serve. He worked as a volunteer, seeking resources for orphanages. Francois visited farms asking for food donations. He went to churches requesting clothes. He negotiated with merchants for reduced prices. He carried sacks of potatoes, boxes of apples, donated blankets. I met him one afternoon when he arrived at Sainte Marie Orphanage, carrying boxes. "Mademoiselle," he said, removing his hat, "I've brought provisions. Where can I leave them?" Sister Agnès smiled, the first time I saw her smile genuinely. "Monsieur Dubois, what a blessing. The children need so much." And so it began. Francois and I became partners in that silent mission to keep those children alive, not just physically, but emotionally. While I preserved their voices, he preserved their bodies. While I guarded their words, he ensured they had food to keep writing. And gradually, week after week, something began to blossom between us. Something gentle and unexpected amid so much suffering. And I felt completely powerless. There I was, a young woman, sitting daily with these children, helping them write letters that might never reach their recipients. For what? To ease my conscience? To pretend I was making a difference? There were nights when I returned to my modest room questioning whether I wasn't being cruel, whether it wouldn't be more honest to tell these children the truth. But then I understood something fundamental. I knew those letters would never reach their recipients. I knew many parents were already dead, that others would never return. But I also knew that if I simply threw them away, it would be as if those children had never existed, as if their love, their hope, their pain, none of it mattered. And I couldn't do that. So I would think about Amélie still, drawing houses. I would think about Julian caring for his little siblings. I would think about Léonie herself, who despite all her bitterness still preserved that deteriorated photograph. And I understood that it had never been about the letters reaching their destination. It was about preserving something the war tried to destroy, the human capacity to love even when loving causes pain, the fundamental need to express oneself, to create connections even across the void. These children were teaching me about resistance. Not the resistance of soldiers, but a more subtle and perhaps more powerful resistance. The resistance of a heart that refuses to harden completely. Léonie had lost her innocence. She had been forced to see the world as it truly was, brutal, unjust, unpredictable. But she still wrote. She still loved. She still preserved that photograph like a treasure. And I began to understand my true role. I wasn't a postal worker filing letters. I was a witness, a guardian of memory, a preserver of voices the war tried to silence. Every letter I preserved was a small victory against forgetting. Every word I kept was proof that these children existed, loved, suffered, resisted, and perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it was the only thing I could do. Remember, keep, preserve, so that someday the world would understand that even in the most absolute horror, humanity had not completely lost its capacity to love. That even in the deepest darkness, there were still voices, whispering words of love. There were still hearts beating with hope. There were still hands writing letters to infinity. Spring 1918, the 4th year of the war. That was the darkest year, when it seemed the war would never end, when even the most optimistic began to lose faith. But it was also the year when I learned that human resilience is stronger than any despair. The news arriving was devastating. The Germans had launched a major offensive in the spring. Paris was under threat of bombardment. Thousands were fleeing the capital, and more children arrived at the orphanages. They weren't just war orphans now. They were refugees, children who had fled from bombarded villages, who had been separated from families during chaotic evacuations, who had lost everything. Sainte-Marie Orphanage, already overcrowded, received 20 more children in a single month. Sister Agnès was exhausted. Resources were at their limit. That's when François intensified his efforts. He organized a network of donors. He convinced farmers to dedicate part of their harvest. He negotiated with bakeries to receive day-old bread. He got seamstresses to donate mended clothes. We cannot let them starve. He told me one night, if the war is destroying everything, at least let us preserve these small lives. And I kept saving letters. The pile grew. Hundreds of them now. Each one with a unique story, unique voice, unique hope, or disillusionment. Amélie still wrote, though her letters were shorter. The hope no longer had the intensity of the beginning. Julien wrote less frequently. He was taking on more responsibilities at the orphanage, helping Sister Agnès with administrative tasks. Léonie stopped writing, but she began helping other children write, as if she had found purpose in preserving others' hopes, even without having her own. And you know, it was that year when I made a decision that would change my life. Papa had received a proposal to return to Bellevaux. The war seemed to be coming to an end. Everyone felt it. The Americans were turning the tide. The Germans were exhausted. Celeste, Papa told me, we can go home, rebuild our lives, leave all this behind. But I looked at those children, at Amélie, at Julien, at Léonie, at Sophie, at so many others, and I knew I couldn't simply leave. Papa, I replied, these children need someone to remember they existed, to preserve their voices. Go to Bellevaux with Mama. I need to stay. It was the hardest decision of my life, but it was also the right one. And François? François understood immediately. I'll stay too, he said simply. Someone needs to ensure they have food, while you ensure they have a voice. And that's how we became partners, not just in that mission, but in life. November 1918. 1,568 days after it all began, the telegram arrived. Armistice signed. Cease hostilities at 11 o'clock. The world exploded in celebration. People running through the streets, crying, laughing, embracing strangers. Church bells ringing incessantly. Shouts of joy echoing throughout Reims. But at Sainte-Marie Orphanage, the children reacted differently. Some cried with relief. Others remained silent, processing. Some asked, Does this mean our parents will come back now? And then began the hardest work, dealing with the realities of the post-war. In the following months, surviving soldiers returned. Some families were reunited. Julian and his little siblings were taken in by an uncle who had survived. Some girls found aunts, distant grandparents. But many remained. Amélie never received news of relatives. Sophie remained alone. Léonie discovered her parents had died in the labor camp. And it was then that François and I made a decision that would define the rest of our lives. These children need help finding their way, he said. They need someone to help them locate distant relatives, to help them rebuild their lives. We married in the spring of 1919, in a simple ceremony in the orphanage chapel. The children were our witnesses, and we dedicated ourselves to that mission, helping war orphans rebuild their lives. We worked with the Red Cross establishing records. We helped locate relatives in other cities, other countries. We organized reunions, transportation, documentation. It took years. Some cases took a decade to resolve. But every child who found a home, every family that was reunited, every orphan who discovered they weren't completely alone, all of that validated our choice. As for the letters, the letters. For years I kept them with me, hundreds of them, preserved in boxes, organized by child, by date. François asked me once, what will we do with them? And I didn't know. Burning them seemed like betrayal, but keeping them forever seemed selfish. It was Léonie herself, already a young adult by then, who gave me the answer. Mademoiselle Celeste, she said, visiting me years later. These letters aren't yours to keep alone. They're historical testimonies. They should be where other people can learn from them. And so it was. I donated most of the letters to museums. The Musée de la Grande Guerre in Meaux received hundreds. National Archives received others. Historical research institutions, universities. But some I kept. The most personal ones. Those that carried pieces of soul that I felt only I should protect. And this box here. This box contains those I could never donate. Not out of selfishness, but out of love. Out of respect, too deep. François and I had a long life together. He left 15 years ago, leaving a void that never completely filled. But the mission we started together continued until his last days. We helped hundreds of orphans over the decades. We worked with humanitarian organizations. We witnessed family reunions that made us cry with joy. Papa and Mama returned to Bellevaux, rebuilt the post office, lived their final years in peace. Visited them frequently, always carrying some letters to show. So they would never forget why I chose to stay. And now, at the end of my own journey, I look at this box and understand. These letters aren't just about the past. They're about the future. They're a reminder that in every war, in every conflict, in every moment of collective suffering, there are small voices asking to be heard. And as long as there is someone willing to listen, to preserve, to remember, humanity will not be completely lost. So this is how I say goodbye, dear listeners. With this box beside me, with a heart full of memories, with gratitude for allowing me to share these voices I kept for so long. But before we go, a final question to take with you. In a world that often teaches us to forget, to move on, not to look back, what would happen if each of us chose to remember? If each of us became the guardian of at least one forgotten story, one silenced voice, one love that deserves to be honored? What story will you choose to preserve? Reflect. And if you wish, write to us. Share your stories of compassion, your memories of moments when someone stopped to listen. Because these stories need to keep echoing from heart to heart. The next time we meet, I'll have more memories. More stories of hearts that resisted, of people who chose to love when loving hurt. Until then, take care. Take care of each other. And remember, every kind word you speak, every gesture of compassion you make, every moment you truly stop to listen to someone, all of that is a love letter to the future. See you in the next story.
Before we say goodbye, there is something important I need to share about this story. Celeste Laurent, as a specific person, is a character created for this narrative, but the experience she represents is profoundly real. During World War I, more than 600,000 French children lost their parents, boys and girls who, from one day to the next, found themselves alone in a world shaped by war. Orphanages were created quickly to care for this lost generation. Religious institutions, humanitarian organizations and volunteers tried to care for these children, often under conditions of severe overcrowding and scarcity. Organizations such as the French Red Cross and the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul operated shelters and support networks for thousands of orphans. And the letters, yes, the letters are real too. Many children wrote to parents who would never return. Some of these letters survived and are preserved today in places like the Musée de la Grande Guerre and the Archives Nationales de France. They are not just historical documents. They are echoes of small voices trying to understand a world that had been broken. The letters of Amélie, Julien, and Léonie in this story were created for this narrative, but their feelings, their hopes, and their words were inspired by real letters written by children who lived through those years. Because the essential truth is this: this story happened. Maybe not with these exact names, maybe not in this exact town, but it happened thousands of times, in hundreds of villages, in thousands of silent homes, in the lives of children who had to grow up far too soon, and in many ways, it still happens today. That is why stories like this continue to be told. Not only to remember the past, but to remind us who we choose to be in the present. Because Celestes still exist, and so do the Amélies, the Julians, and the Léonies, children still waiting for someone to hear their voices. So the question that remains is simple. Will we choose to remember? Or perhaps even more importantly, will we choose to become guardians of these stories? Pause. Because as long as someone remembers, these voices never truly disappear. And perhaps that is what Celeste always understood. That some stories were not written only to be told. They were written to be remembered. If this story touched your heart, leave me a comment and tell me. What stayed with you after this story ended? I read every message. Until the next story, because someone needs to remember.